Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, gentlemen. There is no high, squeaky, happy Tuesday this morning, but a happy Tuesday.
Someone's feeling under the weather today.
Oh, man. Oh, way under the weather. So I am here, kind of. We'll see how much I actually contribute to this conversation. But we'll
I
see.
just thought of it too, that you had to do the happy Tuesday as we are going. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
poor guy.
This is one of the disadvantages of work from home because if you can walk to your computer, it's not like you're still wearing sweatshirts and sweatpants. You know, even though you're under the weather,
Indeed.
people still expect you.
Can you crawl your way up the stairs? Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
The answer is yes.
Yes, great.
Oh man.
Let's jump into some. Let's talk about our main topic today. So our main topic is going through. There's a new series. I guess this would be the new little bit of content here about planning and designing your report building. So implementation planning, going through planning and designing your content. So
Our second episode on our content lifecycle management, right?
Yes. So this is our main second episode around content lifecycle management. We did the overview last episode on this. Now we're going into like kind of step one, planning and designing the content. So that's our main topic today, is figuring out how to design your content, what things should we be considering. And I think a lot of this article will be just what we do as professionals doing this every day, and how does that align with what Microsoft's documentation is coming out and stating about how they're describing. And I'm going to probably highlight some things that I do more of and things that I find more valuable, and other things in here that I'm like, I probably skim over that section. So anyways, good article today. Really like the graphics that are being planned here. Again, it's a very solid article. A lot of good things to pull out of here. Let me throw the link here in the chat window as well, just in case. Good call, Seth. There is the link for the article right there inside the chat window. All right. With that being said, let's talk about some news articles. Some things have been moving and shaken. Power BI, and particularly Fabric, I guess, now is where I spend a lot of my time now. It's getting overwhelming, all the things that are being worked on at one time. There's a crazy amount of like updates and changes and new things and refinements. This really does feel like the early days of Power BI, where the program is changing so fast. You're having every month, every week, there's another blog or post or announcement. So this week, Tommy found a really good one here. Let's talk about this one. Quickly connect to your Azure resources in Fabric with the data pipeline and get the modern data experience. What do you think about this one, Tommy?
I mean, these are the types of updates that I personally love to see. Not that the other ones aren't less great, but this is kind of the synergy or really putting everything together. And those, if there's content out there or updates that is going to complete Fabric, these are the types of updates that are going to go. So really kind of a short story. If you can't read the article, if you're running, doing your biking, really, we can connect to supported Azure data sources, Blob, Data Lake Gen 2, Cosmos DB, Synapse, and you can actually browse those resources, and the ability to copy data, connect to that data becomes much more seamless.
Mhm.
And again, you think about how, or was this possible before? Yeah, but it was APIs. It was, you had to have the experience to do so. It was not this is my first time. And these are the types of things that are going to make what Fabric is going to be, or, the big idea of Fabric really come to fruition.
I like this. And they really changed the UI around how to connect to data. There's this whole new UI, modern, and the left-hand side, it's like a little navigation menu. Okay, first, connect to it. Connect to the data source. Connect to it, tell the destination. Wire it up. All right, review and submit. So one thing I'll note here is this is extremely useful inside, I believe this is only inside pipelines, right, Tommy?
Yes, as of right now, I believe it is pipelines.
I have a couple gripes here. I'm going to throw in here as well. One of my gripes is the ability to connect to data sources. This is kind of universal. This is through this new modern get data experience, as well as anything else you're doing in pipelines. Whenever you create a connection, it's a challenge to work on connections and pipelines with multiple people anymore. just because you can't see their connections. As soon as you go into the pipeline, it says you don't have access. You can't touch this pipeline because, or you can't modify this step because you don't have access to the data connection on the source or the sync side. So if any one of those things is not true, typically where you're writing the data, it's like a lake house. So usually the destination is not a problem, but it's usually the source that's the issue. Someone's connecting to something and it just comes up with a GUID. There's no easy way of contacting the owner. There's no easy, like you have an entirely different window to go to get a connection screens. So while I do like this UI, there's a very strong pushback that I'm getting from it's just difficult to manage connections and secure connections to stuff. Not easy. I think my other note here as well is inside the pipelines experience as well. My other kind of immediate challenge is if things don't fit if it's not a very clean, neat coming out of Azure or SQL or something like that, a lot of these more modern experiences of just trying to very quickly navigate you through, sometimes it falls apart for me. I feel like sometimes I have complex data or things that are coming out that are just a little bit harder to connect to. And it seems like there's not enough customization for me to actually use these experiences. And I start falling back to APIs, directly connecting to it, going right to the blob storage just because the automatic part isn't as easy for me. That may be just me as what I develop. Other companies have a lot of like standard data sources that are just tables, might be easier.
Well, and I think that's the conflict here, because it's like if you're designing a highway and some of those Azure exits, like, oh wow, that's really seamless to get home. But a lot of these extra ones, still a little bit of gravel. Still maybe the stop signs aren't up, but and I think I want to touch on the first thing that you mentioned, because I think this is important. Part of the sell of Fabric, and I think part what's going to take Fabric above and beyond any other product, is going to be the collaboration. But we still have that issue with data flows, where the collaboration's like, oh no, do you want to overtake it? No, I just want to help.
I just want to look at it.
I just want to help. I just want to even look at it.
Why do I need to take over the entire data flow just to look at it? Yes.
And so I think we're getting there, and I love these updates. But yeah, to your point, the allure of Fabric is not what the allure of Power BI was, because the allure is really part of that. A significant part is that collaboration feature.
I mean, let's be real here on some things too. A lot of Power BI has still is single user development. It really is. I mean, you can't work on a model like. When do we get to the stage where I can have two people inside a data model at the same time? You know, there's a lot of other programs that I use. One of them, such as Miro, Microsoft programs. There's other programs you can have two people in the same UI doing the same stuff. That seems to be a very common occurrence. So I want more of that co-collaboration editing. Like Tommy's working on the report that's connected to a data set. So Seth should be able to work on the data set, have that open. Tommy and Mike should be in the report. Tommy's working on page 1. Mike's working on page 2. Like all this should be able to be happening simultaneously, and it should just figure itself out. I think maybe the PBIP format is getting us closer to that step.
But they do it in Power Apps. It's awesome, the collaboration feature in Power Apps. I can see where someone's mouse is. Maybe it's the data processing, but
I don't know.
All I know is when we were doing our training series, it felt very much like the old days of, okay, I'm going to close it.
Okay, Tommy, you pick it up. Okay, I'll close out.
No, it's closed.
Are you sure? Are you out? Are you really out? No, it's open on my other window. Oh shoot, it's a second browser window.
Yeah. Oh, the good old days.
That's funny. Anyways, good article. Good. Happy this is coming out. Stay in tune with the blog. I believe a lot of blog pieces are coming out here recently, so there's a lot more coming out. Stay tuned with that. There's more items coming, so we'll move there. Let's move over to back to our topic. So main topic for today. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean. There's another item here on the list. Tommy, you have an announcement.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this. I have a blog. So I actually just started last week, and I'm actually really excited about this because we've talked about AI and business intelligence, where the synergy is, for a long time, and it's been something that comes up, and it's going to keep coming up. And honestly, a lot of it's like, okay, let's put your words to where your mouth is, or what you're saying. So if you go to promptingbi.com, there's an article there, and it's a website, and the idea of this blog, I hate redundancy. So I'm not just going to say, hey, I'm going to do another Power BI or another Fabric blog. I'm very interested in the Venn diagram of skills between what you do in BI and what you're going to do in AI. And specifically, the focus is going to be around prompt engineering, at least a lot of the first few articles. Because one of the things I mentioned here is like, what's the next coding language that's going to be essential for people? It's English. And we're going to talk about hard skills on obviously the core, like what can I do with Jupyter notebooks and Copilot? What can I do with prompting? But also, how can a team of business intelligence or a team working with data apply the soft skills around prompting? We're going to obviously touch on a few other things, a ton of other content, but I'm excited to have this. I'm excited to touch this space because I haven't seen any content around this, and it's somewhat of a new space. That I'm really excited to kind of get people's feedback. Already pretty good, but just a fun place where honestly I'm working on things now that I think I'll be having as a service or a product 2 years from now, and I just seeing where's the evolution, and not just in Fabric, but what is that evolution also? How's AI going to come into our lives, or the prompting side of it? There are things 2 years from now that I'm trying to look for that I think we're experiencing or beginning to experience that beginning kind of fruition of.
I like this. I think this is I think it's a very relevant topic, Tommy, just from the idea of that I think prompting is here to stay. It's a different way to program computers than what we've done traditionally. Instead of writing actual code, we have to do more creative prompts. And Tommy and I, to be frankly honest, Tommy's taught me a lot about prompting and how elaborate you can go with these different prompts. And I'm always like, Tommy, send me that prompt. Tommy, show me this thing. Tommy, what are you doing over here? Like, he's doing all these creative things, and there's no way to get it out there to the masses. And I'm like, dude, this is a perfect place to start your own blog, start figuring out how to use Copilot in various forms across the Fabric ecosystem. Give me example prompts. Let's start building a prompt notebook of things. And this is one thing I think is interesting. Like,
and then you don't have to ask him anymore.
And then I have to ask him anymore. Well, and again, it's not necessarily asking. It's more of like, I don't even know what you're doing. Like, you're just working on stuff, and you're like, hey, I found this really interesting thing. Well, I don't know. Like, how do I get that information out of your head? Like, what were you thinking what's the challenge you're trying to solve? And how does prompting and or a various Copilot make that work?
Well,
anyways,
the inspiration, and I'm not pandering here, honestly, the inspiration was you guys, where you're like, hey, we have all these things. Let's just put it on the web. Let's just put the blog together. All of a sudden, the best Power BI blog or website, in my opinion, powerbi.tips, but no affiliation. We're actually quite a bit. But anyways, no, I think for anyone out there too, if you have an idea, like, just start putting it out there. I was so worried about beginning to write because my wife's doing my editing, and she's like, not only do I not understand AI, I can't follow your train of thought. So just getting the writing out there, and I think for anyone too, it's not that difficult. So,
expect this entire blog to be written by ChatGPT all the time.
And Sarah Puglia, yeah.
The other ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Joe, go check out Tommy's new blog. We're going to continue to push him to get content out there that is interesting and fun to engage with around the AI space. I think this is going to be a thing moving forward. It's going to be interesting to see, Tommy, where you can find what parts of AI make the most sense inside report design and report building experiences. I'm not sure. I don't think we're there yet. I definitely see. It's like when you see
there's been attempts.
Yeah, it's like when you're looking at a horizon, or you're looking at a landscape, and you're seeing some glimmer of hope or some glimmers of the direction. And like, I think I see that. But it's going to really have to come back to how is this really going to materialize into becoming a single site or a single direction where we can actually get value from it. And I think clearly we're there in like code. I think code is there. I've also heard some people heavily, especially on YouTube. I follow a lot of developers on YouTube, and they heavily bash the AI because the AI just basically looks at everyone's code, good or bad, and decides here's the code that you need to do the thing. And so people are like, oh yeah, this works, and then they just absorb the code and go with it, but it's not optimized. It's not very well written. And then that mediocre or bad code, yes, it does something, but it's not well written. Then it gets back into the ecosystem, and then the thing trains itself on this other mediocre code. So you're kind of always in this regression. Everything gets kind of low, less quality over time. So how do you add high quality information into the system? That's people. People are the high quality adders of information. Anyways.
Donald asks a question that I think we get a lot, but what are you guys using for a platform for blogging?
Tommy, you want to go ahead?
Page out of your book. I just want to do WordPress because I like the open source of it.
It is still WordPress.
Yeah, it's still WordPress. I tried Squarespace. I tried looking at a few others, but I really just like the fact that I can configure everything in WordPress. So all the tweaking possible. I've been enjoying it.
Are you self-hosting it, Tommy, like in Azure?
Yeah.
Or are you okay?
No, it's Bluehost. So
okay, yeah. Gotcha. So Donald, also, I will make a note here. I have also built our Power BI tips on WordPress, and I stood up WordPress inside of Azure. So I'm basically managing it myself. I'm not hosting it through WordPress.com, because you can go to WordPress.com and pay for it there. I was too cheap. I said I'll just do it myself. I want to learn how to deploy apps and things. One thing though I would recommend though, if you're new users to this space and you don't need a lot of like heavy customization like Tommy or we have done through the WordPress sites, which gives tons of plugins, you can do cool things. I would highly recommend GitHub Pages or things that are static websites where you use Markdown to build them. One, they're extremely cheap to run, and they are extremely fast to load. So if you're going to get into blogging or do things, learn how to write Markdown. I would say 90% of every blog could be just written in pure Markdown and then just absorbed into a program. So some applications that I'm looking at using, I think the one that I'm most recently interested in working with, and we've been doing some projects around, is astro.build. I'll put the link out there for you.
There's Jekyll,
Donald.
right? Isn't that one? Jekyll's another kind of a, and then there's a bit of YAML too. So there, if you have some code, right?
Well,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so you're mixing a couple things here. So Jekyll, I believe, is taking like a site like WordPress where you have like a headless CMS.
Yes.
So you have a CMS, a content management system, and then it compiles down to a static website, which Jekyll, I believe, does that, which is also a good thing. Again, it makes a static website, which I'd highly recommend. That's really what the speed comes from there. All of our applications we build now are all static web apps. So I'd recommend that one. And then I'd also recommend GitHub Pages. Those are also, it's a little bit trickier to get started, I think, on GitHub Pages. It's not as straightforward as you would think, but there are good examples out there to get going. And I would recommend that one as well. So those are two items I would recommend if I was going to rebuild a website and start over again. I would use GitHub Pages, either Astro or build static web apps. Those are my recommendations. All right, let's jump on to the main topic for today. Good to move to the main topic?
Let's do it.
All right. So let me get the link here for everyone on the chat window. So this is the main topic for today, planning and designing our content. Tom, you want to give us a quick overview of what's going on here?
Yeah. So again, this is a series that we're going to be doing every other Tuesday around Power BI content lifecycle, or CLM for short. Our overview was, again, about 2 weeks ago, and we're focusing on not just the publishing, the creation, planning, deploying, and retirement of content around Power BI. This is something we've talked about. This is something that we've worked on other projects around, but up really until I believe a few months ago, this content was not available from Microsoft on what does Microsoft say is the best practices. What's a roadmap here? Our first series, our first episode was really around the overview. What are we going to be talking about? We're really now into really step one. And this is going to be the first thing that you want to do before you open up a PBIX or PBIP or whatever you're going to be creating. What are you doing? And where's the planning? Where's the content around? So we're going to really talk about that planning and design stage, which is our initial stage of the content lifecycle.
All right. So jumping into stage one, plan and design content. There's a couple main headers here we should probably talk through. Identifying, describing your contents, where the article kind of starts off. What is the format of the content? Who will create and support the content? What is the importance of said contents? And that's kind of like your first section. Yeah. I'm going to kind of maybe lean in here. I think they have I think these are all great questions. And I really like this article in the fact that it's actually going through and actually asking you specific questions. What format should my content be in? And it goes through and says, what should we look like? Which type of content do you want to create? Are we talking about a paginated report? Are we talking about a report? Are we talking about analyzing Excel or model connected? Or now are we talking about tables? I'm having a lot more conversations with organizations about what is your data need. And I think a lot of times I'm feeling more of the conversation is I don't have access to any data. I just need tables of information to show up to me. So a lot more of the conversation more recently has been just focusing on how do I get content or tables of data in a place where I can play with them. Where some organizations are having, when we talk broader deployments, many of the needs are at that lower end level. There's less need around, hey, I'm building an executive or a summary or a KPI report that has all these high level directional things. I think that comes with over time after you've had access to the data for a bit and can start making assumptions or figuring out what to do with the data over time.
Well, let's lean into this because I think you're touching on a really, I think, underrated point on what we do. I'm actually working with a client right now, and they're putting together these personas and skills assessments that they want to see for new power users, Power BI people.
Sure.
And one of the things I mentioned is like, this is great. You're talking all the technical sides of what they need to do, but there's nothing in here about around gathering requirements and that as a skill. This is important. And like I said, I really do think this is the most underrated aspect of what someone's considered in business intelligence. Our ability to translate a business need, a problem, or a question and put that into a technical aspect of a data product, whether it's going to be a report, a semantic model, or something in Fabric. This is really, really integral that you can do this well, you can do this efficiently, and you can do this holistically.
Yeah, I think this is a very repeatable pattern.
Yeah.
And I think in those early stages, it's about what do you want? What are you trying to get? One thing also that's very relevant here as well is I think towards the end of this first section here is who is the person who's expected to support the content. This, I think, is also very underrated as well. Because let me think, another conversation I've been having recently, which has been very relevant here, is think about all the different ways you can share things. I can share via an app. I can share a workspace. I can share a data set. I can now share tables. So if you think about what you build, like let's think about the process of how you build things. I bring data in, I make enriched tables of information. So I get to a point where I have a table that's in a gold layer. It's good enough to give out to people. And then I make from that gold layer tables, I make semantic models, I make reports, and then I put them in workspaces, and then I share them via apps. The fact that we can share all the way down to the table level, there needs to be a conversation held around what is the level of responsibility? Who is going to own what in the process? Are we going to allow users to not own the report and just give them an app to consume? Or are we going to own the data set and give you your own workspace to play in? Or are we going to stretch even further and say, we'll just manage the tables as a central team and give you access to the tables, build the models that you need, and you maintain them? And I think there's a delegation of responsibility the further upstream you go.
Yeah.
This decision relies upon how capable you think your business is. And I would recommend you start with the app side because that's the most groomed area of content, unless you have teams of people that are actually capable or understand or can work on things on their own. That every team may not be the same way. You may have some teams that act on the tables. You may have some teams that act on the models. You may have some teams that only act on the apps.
I feel like, I think we need to backtrack a little even from that too. Personally, when you think about all the technical aspects, the first main header here, I personally love that they put it this way, and it's identify and describe the content. Because Mike, I mean, even if we're talking about the tables and the technical aspects, we're still dealing with the business on a lot of aspects here. And one of the things that I've worked on is projects around help desks. And when do we get to the building stage? And that's been a conversation, debate that we've had. And to me, putting out the statement of what are we building, and having everyone sign off on that is critical to getting to the app or the table or to the sources.
Agree.
And I think, again, I kind of want to lean in here, because when you think about the people involved, and they talk about the COE and the BI teams. So you're dealing with people with heavy developmental skills. You're talking about people who are just business facing, who could not tell you what Azure is, except maybe it's the color blue. And so you're dealing with all these aspects. So we have to get them all on the same page. And I love the idea of, let's put a statement out here on what we are going to build. And let's make sure we are aligning everyone's expectations. So this idea of the formatting, to your point, is it tables? Do we just need tables? Right? Like, what are we going to be doing with this? This is going to solve X. Those are the types of wording that we need to do. And we need to make sure that everyone is on the same page and we're not building too quickly.
Yeah, that's where I think if I was going to change something in documentation, that first section in the tip, I wouldn't put architectural diagram, because that's not the right type of diagram for this, from my perspective. I think we're at a conceptual phase where you're outlining a lot of these things, and we did a podcast on like the multiple hierarchy of like your architectural diagram is the most granular, where you have your data types, you have all the nitty gritty, but through there, I think there was one in between where you have to your point, Tommy, be on the same page with people. And one of the best ways to do that is through visualization, when you're just like, hey, okay, well, we're going to pull data in from here, and this is how we're going to do this. And then we're going to add some business logic. We're going to filter this out, and then we're going to add that. And I think that is much more effective with communicating to the business, rather than talking about the tools, the data types, the nitty gritty of like tables and things, because they're not, a lot of times they're not used to engaging with those types of conversations.
I think you actually just got my hot take for later from what you mentioned. So
no,
no, I'll wait, but I think you just got what my statement's going to be. But this is a kind of interesting point, and I think it was Data Mark who had the conceptual data model, or the conceptual semantic model.
Yes, I think this is important at this phase.
Yeah, that's exactly what the stage. Yeah,
I think another one, and maybe they're also doing this one here, is, where does the content come from? Like, when we say, internet data or sales data from this source or whatever, like, let's define what that looks like. And I think a lot of this also for me is especially in this early phase, there's probably people already doing something similar, or something where they're getting and also thinking about here too, you transition from other tools into Power BI. A lot of companies are moving from Click or Tableau or getting to Power BI as well. I think people have already set processes in place that do this. So I think a lot in this phase, especially in this early planning and design, is show me what you're doing. Show me what you're adding to this information. I like that a lot more. What is your show me the final output of what you're doing in Excel, so I can understand what are the data sources. And I do think you need, maybe it's not an architectural diagram set like you said, but maybe it's more of a conceptual model of, okay, we have users, we have people, we have websites, we have hits. Like, what are those things, and how do those things join together, so we can then go find, okay, do we even have all the data? Is there a place where all this stuff lives yet? Odds are no. And we might need to start being a little bit more creative about loading some different data sources to the same place.
And let me ask you a question, because I think that goes along with what you're saying, because how many issues have we had where it's like, oh no, the data is coming from here. Once you start the project, you realize that there's a lot more complications. Would you consider research part of planning and designing content? And the reason I asked that is, yes, you can get requirements from someone saying it's Salesforce. You're like, okay, but it may be an obscure table in Salesforce that needs a lot of work. So would this be part of planning and designing, where not only are we getting where the source is, but we're also describing here maybe what are the barriers that we're going to face? What are the critical, this is one of the sources, but man, we've done our work and we found out that it's going to need some merges. It needs a lot of work in order to get it to what everyone's describing they think it is.
I don't know if research is the right term for that. We say discovery, right?
Okay.
Like there's a lot of unknowns around what it is we're trying to accomplish. And like, you may have an idea that like in your cursory glance, like you're saying,
Mhm.
like there's some really messed up stuff in this table. We got to go figure it out first.
Yeah.
And those are precursors to like the project, because a discovery could lead to the fact that you can't do it, or there's a dependency on something else that you need to have in the data set before you can go down that road.
So really, we're killing our assumptions here. If there's a
Yeah.
layman's
Yeah.
term,
Well, you have to, right? Because
Yeah.
you like
Mm.
in anything in terms of like a larger project, to define the requirements, you can't leave a lot of ambiguity, right? Like otherwise you're going to get an outcome that's unexpected or not wanted. Excuse me. So in general, you have to knock all that out prior to, technically grooming it with whomever
Yeah.
is going to, be estimating the work.
I like the term discovery more than research, and I agree with you, Tommy. I think research is part of what we're doing here, but I like the word discovery a bit more because
Yeah.
I think in this first phase you're also identifying, again, the reason why you put down these topics and sources fit together, because you want that to come back to what do we know we can do, and what do we know we think we don't know? What are the unknowns we have to go research or discover about them? And I feel like a lot of these things too this is not necessarily a super fast cycle, or maybe it is a super fast cycle, right? We're quickly, okay, great, we understand your context. Point me to the servers where this data lives. Let me just go do some discovery on it to make sure we know we need to go get. I will say this. I think people severely underestimate how much data engineering is required to manipulate data to get it to a place where it's ready to be used inside a report or a semantic model, because it's just hard to figure things out. And if you're ever chasing bad data, where did it come from? Or you apply business logic to it, and that's changing how the data. Anytime I hear the word, let's restate something, the phrase, let's restate this, or that to me sends red flags up for me that means we're just doing a lot of additional data engineering work that we're going to have to like really understand what you mean, because a restatement means the source system or the systems that are generating the data don't match the way you want to report on the data. So you're reallocating or restating the data in a way that makes sense to the business so they can run their business. That's incredibly time consuming to get right. And so whenever I hear that phrase, I'm like, whoa, let's really make sure. Do we really need to restate it, or can I just give it to you as its form, in its current form, and let you use that?
So, two great things with that. One, I agree with you with the reset. If you're ever using the word restate, not just in business, but do that with your significant other. When next time, like, let me restate what I was saying. It doesn't work. But I think it's the same thing. But I think the last 5 minutes, as we've talked about this discovery phase and the effort involved, I've had a shadow coming over me that is time. And I'm thinking about this more and more as we're talking about the whether you call it research or discovery, the time and taking to make sure we're killing assumptions
Mm-hmm.
involves more time, involves delaying, so to speak, actually the end result. So this is a critical part too, is how do we manage the need or the willingness of the business to say, we'll take the time right now, but we really want to see some fruit. We want to see some results here. And even though this may take quite more time than people expect it to.
Ooh, what's the phrase? The pursuit of perfection is the enemy of good, or something like that. Or
Yeah.
what is it? I don't know what it is. I'm saying that all wrong. I'm sure that's incredibly incorrect. Donald, can you pick me up here? What's the phrase here? I don't know what the phrase is, but I think your point there is taken as Tommy is. If you spend all your time to make it perfect day one, you'll never get anything done, and you're going to spend a lot of time, and the project will extend so long that we're going to be like disillusioned by it takes forever to get anything out of here. It's not worth our time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the idea of Power BI. So Donald says, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Sorry. Donald was driving in his Tesla somewhere. So we don't know what he was talking about. So Donald, I was referring to the idea of perfect is the enemy of good. I think that's what the phrase I was looking for, or good enough or something like that. I don't know what it was.
We'll take it.
Don't drive for perfection, right? Think of this as an iterative process. You're going to get a first product out there, and from there, Yeah, I'm being perfectionistic about the quote myself. I'm sorry about that. There we go. James got it for me. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Okay. And the idea is get something out there, get people to react to it. It may not be perfect day one, but make it very clear that you're going to take an iteration or a design step on this one. To your point, Tommy, we need quick wins. We need people to see that the value of this is coming out of this very quickly.
On the other side of the coin,
I do think though, because we've talked about, content planning lifecycle in the context of just Power BI in the past, right? Like now that we're introducing Fabric, like there are longer projects, there are bigger data movement things, and like so there's this balance, I think, where the project itself is going to take longer, typically.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the purpose of developing all of these requirements and building out and understanding what the goals are is that you can show incremental value. And sometimes and I think where you can do that in phases or in an iterative fashion, the business is much more like engaged there. But at the same time, like what's interesting is aren't the audience of requesters different in the Fabric realm as opposed to business? Like they can be one and the same, but it's like when you're engaging with people who are asking for reports, it's business people who are generally, I like to say, like just flying by the seat of their pants, right? Every day is just this, like it's a constant stream of the things they're knocking down with no planning. And a lot of, I think, business in general is like there's a lot of things that got to get done, but everything's immediate, right? Like your time, Tommy, is my time because I have an immediate need.
Right.
And there's that false assumption that I think business intelligence people have to navigate through when developing things for business in that regard, where that starts to kind of shift, like in my mind, departmentally, is like it's not the front end business user talking about big data projects, right? Like it typically you're moving back into a realm where folks are understanding that, okay, well, yeah, this thing may take a sprint or two, right? Like 2 to 4 weeks or something, but can we show some incremental value and push out a report, right? Because we're going to prove out the model, we're going to, validate the data sets, we're going to do all these things. And yes, we can produce that for you. But in the realm of Fabric, right, while we're in here, we may as well build this certified data set completely, right? Like we might as well knit all of these structural things behind the scenes, automate all the refreshes, et cetera, and then scale up or allow ourselves more opportunity to grow and expand on the back end data models, as opposed to just keeping that right in front of right in front of business users. James, you came in late. Yeah, not feeling well today. Yeah, energy's a little low.
I think he's doing great, by the way. I think I like this voice, this grungy voice kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is like Nickelback or something.
I was gonna say it sounds like a good old rock band now.
Yeah.
Look at this photograph.
Look at this fabric.
Was not spending time at concerts.
Data flows wide open. No, okay.
All right, move on, Tommy. Move on.
No, so I as you described that, and honestly, this article, there's an idealism here. I don't know people realize that they can't afford, and I'll expand on this. Everything in this article, the importance of the content, describing who's going to collaborate, where are we going to collaborate, who's going to be responsible for what, or what tables are the ownership. All of this is still that conceptual diagram, the conceptual model. None of this is fruition. None of this is anything that anyone's going to be a tangible product. And you think also too, it's not just us putting this together. Well, we now have to work with all the other teams and all the other people to get their feedback, to get the information, to make sure that they're open to collaborate and they're giving us the information we need. That's a lot of resources and a lot of time. Most organizations, especially, I would say an average data culture, is not going to afford or is not going to allow. You have a very healthy data culture. This is already the expectation. You're doing this for the first time somewhere. I don't know. And again, correct me if I'm wrong or tell me I'm wrong, but a lot of organizations, while it sounds great, are not going to go for all of this right off the bat. Especially if because usually the needs, what you're working on, if it's one of your first things, is a priority.
I'm not following completely.
I think it depends on what the organization really wants. Regardless, Tommy, I think what you're saying is the business needs to commit to this. It's a large investment of time, resources, and money to get to this phase. And so I would argue, depending on where you're at in your organization, if you are just saying, we're just trying to start out with Power BI, what are some good projects for us to begin with? That is a larger project. It'll probably be handled by more of a central team or a certain group of people, a very single team that's going to start to figure out, can we use Power BI effectively? So a lot of this, what I'm seeing is, if we're trying to roll out Power BI and do this staging and planning content, I would argue you're probably putting too many things in one basket to get everything accomplished. And this is another part of the article that I want to point out now, is going further down the article, it starts talking about how content creators will collaborate. And I feel like this section on how you collaborate, whether it's going through Azure DevOps or through SharePoint, where you collect the resources and how the files work, I think both of those should be viable processes, but those should be decided a bit more upfront and beforehand, right? You shouldn't be in the middle of creating your first work of content or work of content for a team and not knowing how you're going to work together as a team. We're going to publish everything to SharePoint. That's where we're going to store things. All our version, we're not going to use _final_1_2. This is final version 3. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to have just a single name, and we're just going to overwrite it in SharePoint that we have versions of the file. So I think there are patterns here that we need to establish. But as we look through some of this, if you look at this from a greenfield starting from scratch, this looks different than if I already have some established processes and how this should work.
Yeah, I don't think we've given a lot of love to the collaboration side of that and the importance of planning that. That actually may be a third part of the series. We may actually just split this in two, because I'm looking at all of this content and I think our conversations have naturally lend itself to that planning stage. And I think the central BI team putting things together, but to your point, to the very beginning of our news, where Power BI has always been an individualistic tool, maybe by design, where it's usually one person building the report or the semantic model. But now we're getting to this phase of where collaboration is going to be much more critical, and not just, can you review my model, but who's working on it and at what phase in the supply chain, so to speak.
I mean, as I look through the rest of the article here, I mean, we quickly move away from like requirements gathering about the report, and then we heavily focus on, the middle of the article to the end is all around, okay, what are we doing? Is it Azure DevOps? And then in here, this is where I get a little bit burnt a little bit. Azure DevOps does a good job of giving you an Azure repository to collect the files and the things of the reports. In the article, it talks about Azure pipelines. In the article, it talks about test plans, Azure boards, Azure Wiki. These are all good things that go along with this. But have I seen any kind of content blogs, pieces come out other than John Kursky around using an Azure pipeline to deploy the content into a workspace? No, I have not. I'm not aware of anything. Are there specific...
You're not going to see it on mine.
Are there specific tool sets that are letting me do tests on a data model when it's been published to validate if it's right or not? Like, this stuff, when you move into this Azure realm, it is highly technical, and you're installing Tabular Editor 2, running Business Practice Analyzer against a model and kicking out a whole bunch of artifacts that says, is this good or not? Mm-hmm. To me, this is very deep. And so not many organizations, I think, are at that level where they're actually able to spend time. So to me, this really feels like, okay, are you a small team? Then you go down the Microsoft Teams route and SharePoint storing your files. If you're a large team and you have people that know how to use Azure DevOps and can build proper tests on things, and this also requires, this means you have enough knowledge of the models to say, in our models, we want these kind of behaviors. In these models, we don't want these kind of behaviors. Mm-hmm. That's a much more established process around what you say is, or you're deeming as good. And someone has to take the helm and lead that effort in the organization.
Yeah. I do like the Christmas tree effect down at the bottom of the the more you go down, you scroll down.
Oh, yes.
They're very,
You get more.
very, very poignant cautions and warnings and good. You know, it's like if somebody's just going to breeze through the article, it's not a bad thing to do.
And I think that's the word of advice, right? So there's definitely some cautions. There are definitely some big warnings here. I agree with this one. If you're using SharePoint or OneDrive, don't use personal OneDrives. No one can share anything with anyone, right? You really do want a SharePoint site that's collaborative where you put these files that everyone can use. The other here about OneLake, a lot of items here as well. So if you're building systems that require so much caution and warnings and tips about things, is it really a good solution? Would be my pushback here a little bit.
That's a little intriguing you're saying that, because the assumption, I feel like if I was the author of the article, my assumption is we're building a pretty heavy project. And you touched on something, both of you. We may not be always building the latest and greatest, innovation to the company. What about mid to smaller projects? I think where does some of that design? I'm looking at just one of the sections here. Where are we actually going to store the data? It's a lot. Like there's a lot here of the considerations where, to your point, I don't know if all of that needs to be considered, because SharePoint may be a great solution for a lot more situations than you think. Again, maybe we devote an entire episode or a series around DevOps and GitHub around this, because I mean, you're talking about two drastically different paths of the people involved in this, and also really probably what you're building too.
There's a couple points here that I want to make note around this one. Like when you're talking about our guidance on things have changed over time. I feel like, right? If we thought about early days of Power BI, we were very heavily create everything with desktop. Desktop is the way. Build it all with desktop. And so I feel like there's now opportunities for us to have less of that. And one of the things that is written in the article that I do not agree with, it says, it talks about in the idea of never creating anything from the portal, never create anything from PowerBI.com inside the report side of things. And yes, while I understand the edge cases or the pros and cons of that, there is a lot more. It's becoming more and more easy for us to download a live connected report off of existing content, even though you may have a data set that you cannot download because it's a data set and report. So I feel like Microsoft's making the right strides to making things easier for us to leverage. There's a lot more coming, and I really feel like the right approach or the direction we're going here is down this PBIP file route, where the report side can be easily separated from the data side, and you're then able to grab and manipulate these two items independently. So all this to say is, I think whether you're going to decide to upload content via SharePoint, OneDrive, OneLake, a remote repo like Azure DevOps, or now GitHub, which is in preview, by the way, and then just building in the service. In all of those scenarios, someone at the COE should be making up, when is it acceptable to do these kind of build styles? What is the process that we're going to use to do each one of these? And then the business can decide, okay, is this a really big project? Okay, then we need to go down the route of using a remote repository. That's what we're going to do. Oh, this is a business team. Okay, who's going to own that content? I think a lot of that ownership conversation we had earlier in the article leans on, okay, if you're a team of people that are going to be building this one, okay, you use Teams and SharePoint. All right, well, you're a very field oriented, or you have Macs or something else pushes you. Okay, you're just going to create content in the service. We'll let you have access to data sets. So I really do think it's very important for you to evaluate these different methods and pick which one is the right one, and then build a process around that, and that becomes part of your community practice. Anyways, lots of thoughts here. Any other things you want to wrap here? And Tommy, do you have a hot take you want to jump into here?
I do have a hot take, and this is inspiration from Seth, something earlier he said. So I'll bring it back to our initial designing planning. Seth said the need for the visual side of how we're planning, designing, how we're communicating our conceptual model. Big part here is, he said, is like the importance of the diagram, or the importance of visualizing what we're going to build. Therefore, I'm really feeling here that part of the Power BI Pro or the BI Pro's skill, if you're leading this, it's essential to say, if you're excellent at your job in this space, you better have good diagramming or visualization skills. And I don't mean data. Your ability to diagram, whether it's Miro or PowerPoint, whatever that is, to visualize and conceptualize it through visuals is an essential skill. Essential.
I'd agree with that.
I'd give that a good, if we're doing ranking or, agree or not agree, if we're doing 1 to 7, I'm going to say that's probably a 7 for me. I mean, I would say the amount of times I spend in front of people doing a whiteboard of like, here's what we're doing. Here's kind of like the high level architecture. Here's the concepts. Let's just at least list out the data sources. We're going to try and join things by like all of that. That's, to me, that's another language of communication, right? It's a visual way. And I think a lot of people, especially now being as more remote, I think a lot of people need to see things visually to stay engaged in the conversation. And then it also helps as a takeaway at the end of that meeting to be like, okay, does everyone agree upon what we see here? Because to your point, Seth, earlier, there's discovery that needs to happen, right? Yeah. You can easily label in that diagram, okay, we think we need 5 data sources to make this one data model. We don't know about this 5th one, or we don't know what we would connect on. Is the data even there to connect it between the other system and our current system? So we need to figure it out.
Yeah, I would argue it's a skill that if you don't have, that you start spending time doing more, because more often than not, especially in so many different cases, right? People will say, like you'll go through this huge description, right, of all of these different components, and then you'll ask, okay, does that make sense? 99% of the people are going to be like, yep, totally makes sense. And then obviously it doesn't, because all the questions still come later or people are still confused, etc. So what's so fantastic about it is it does twofold. One, it brings them along for the ride, allows people to conceptualize what you're thinking about. And then to Mike's point, at the end of it, you have agreement on what you're building, right? On a high level. This is the scope of what we're after.
Yes.
And then the action items out of that meeting, that conceptual, are like, okay, well, the team's going to go do some discovery over here, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do a follow-up based on the data that we're seeing and show you the other business logic that we're applying now, blah, blah, blah. And then it leads into actual architectural diagrams where you go build stuff.
And I think that's important too, because it is I feel like it's a different part of the brain than just doing data visualization.
Yes.
It's a different muscle. I'll put it that way, and it's taken from someone who has taken, it's been a long journey around conceptual designing for me. But yeah, man, I think for all the things that we're talking about here, this is a hard skill. This is a hard and soft skill at the same time, that if you are just starting your journey and you want to become part of the leadership capacity, you need to have this ability.
So you got me to agree with you, Tommy, on your hot take.
I'm actually pretty stoked, and it wasn't a negative statement.
So out of it and delusional, I'll probably fight it tooth and nail in some future podcast. Yeah,
exactly.
Like, this was not even.
I did not, nor would I ever agree with one of your hot takes.
I was about to say, we'll take the win here. I'm gonna. You won't remember today. That's the best part. You're gonna forget that this even happens. Like, no, you disagreed. Totally.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Well, with that, we really appreciate your ears, your time listening to us and going through this episode here. Let's just really quickly wrap with some final thoughts, and then we'll kind of get out of here. So, I think my final thought, this one, planning and designing is essential. I think this is a very important topic. I think a lot of the earlier content parts of the article talking about the questions of what content am I designing, what's the expectations, how do I stitch the data together, like what is the expectations there. More often than not, people are just looking for paginated reports and extractions of data from systems. When you have to early identify what you're trying to do. Is this a data extraction event, or are we actually talking about a report with insights and repeatable questions we're trying to answer? I think a lot of times people overbuild their reports and they just need to get data into a system and out. So I think that's really important in this phase. And then I would say once you get through, how content should collaborate, and then how do you build those tools, either OneDrive repos, or other ways. I think all that should be process driven. I think, when you're building reports, this should all be known. You should automatically be able to have a decision tree that says, okay, this is a central IT report. We're going to use repos. This is a governed thing. Great. This is how we're going to build it. So I think a lot of other consideration points are very valid and worthwhile thinking about. But I would hope you already have this designed as part of your center of excellence or community practice before we go to our very first report and we're doing this stuff. Tommy, any hot takes or final thoughts?
I do have a few more hot takes. The last thing is, honestly, if you focus your time on all just developmental and the technical side, you are really not understanding the full picture of what your job is. And I think what we really bring to the table, and I think what the value of us at an organization, and it is our ability to project manage too and align people's expectations. We're in the therapy business, helping people out, and that ability to align expectations, get people on the same page on what we're going to build is incredibly huge in what we do.
Any final thoughts, Seth, for you? Would you already give your final thoughts?
I feel like I'm being taken advantage of because of from the chat. So I'm going to do something I normally don't do. And there is a Liam Neeson reference.
Oh no.
And that's Enterprise AR wants me to say, I'm a man with a particular data skill set. I will find you and your data. And that is my closing thought.
That's
I love it
today too.
I enjoy it. Enterprise AR, great recommendation on that one. We thank you very much.
That's how you start your discovery calls.
There you go. That's how they start. That's exactly right. I love it. Well, thank you all very much. We really appreciate your ears. If you don't mind, if you like this episode, honestly, go read this article. And this is definitely worthwhile your time. I think this is highly recommended if you're in the Power BI development space. Your team and you should know what planning and designing is doing. We highly recommend driving you to that article. It's very great. Recommend to somebody else. We really appreciate your ears. Thank you, everyone in chat. Teasing Seth, we appreciate it. I know I do. We don't get to tease Seth very often, so this was a very fun too.
Great opportunity.
Very great opportunity there. So thank you very much. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, all three of us, all the time, no matter how we're feeling, and join the conversation on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
Excellent. And with that, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.